Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Trump trying to pin the Epstein scandal on Bill Clinton, as the recent release of Epstein emails implicate Trump further, with Epstein trashing his former friend, writing, quote, "I have met some very bad people, none as bad as Trump. There is not one decent cell in his body. So yes, he's dangerous." Joining us to look into what our intelligence services knew about Trump's ties to foreign leaders is Daniel Boguslaw, an investigative reporter based in Washington, D.C. His interests include corporate corruption, congressional and White House investigations, American influence overseas, and organized labor, and his work is featured in The Intercept, The New Republic, The American Prospect, among others. And he has an article at the American Prospect, Epstein's confidant Larry Summers Guiding Caps Project 2029. And he has an article at Unheard, the CIA's Epstein Problem. Then with Trump targeting Antifa, then issuing National Security Presidential Memorandum NSPM 7 to target a broad swath of his enemies, then on Friday targeting 4 German, Greek, and Italian anarchist organizations as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs on the level of Al-Qaeda. We'll speak with Faiza Patel, Senior Director of the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program. She's a nationally recognized expert on government surveillance, especially its targeting of minority communities, domestic terrorism, and the impact of technology on civil rights and civil liberties. And she has an article at the Brennan Center, Trump's Orders Targeting Anti-Fascism Aim to Criminalize Opposition. Then finally, with AI threatening future employment on a massive scale, particularly among young people already indentured by student loan debt, Background Briefing's Gen Z reporter Sasha Linden Cohen will look into how much AI will be an issue in the next election. Joining Sasha is Aaron Regunberg, a contributing editor at The New Republic, a climate lawyer, and a progressive organizer. He's the director of the Climate Accountability Project at Public Citizen and previously served as a member of the Rhode Island House of Representatives. She will discuss his latest article at The New Republic, Americans Hate AI. Will the Democrats join them? And before we begin, for over a decade, we have warned that Trump is both a criminal and likely a traitor, not to mention he's mentally unstable, egomaniacal, woefully ignorant, wildly incompetent, insatiably greedy, and corrupt. Now it should be clear to all that his chaotic misrule must be ended as soon as possible, and until that happens, Background Briefing will continue to investigate and expose MAGA criminality and cruelty. But more importantly, explore strategies and popular movements to bring about regime change as quickly as possible to restore democracy and civility and stop the systematic destruction of the United States at home and its standing abroad. To help sustain us with public broadcasting and freedom of the press itself under assault as Trump's billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media, you can make a tax-deductible donation to our nonprofit foundation, the Public Truth Media Foundation, at publictruthmedia.org or at backgroundbriefing.org/donate. And thank you. And joining us now is Daniel Boguslaw, who's an investigative reporter based in Washington, D.C. His interests include corporate corruption, congressional and White House investigations, American influence overseas, and organized labor. And his work is featured in The Intercept, The New Republic, The American Prospect, among others, and he has an article at The American Prospect, Epstein's confidant Larry Summers Guiding Caps Project 2029, and an article at Unheard, the CIA's Epstein Problem. Welcome to Background Briefing, Daniel Boguslaw.
Thanks for having me in.
Well, thanks for joining us. And this cache of emails from the estate seem to indicate that the House, Oversight Committee reluctantly released, but it's obviously people are poring over it. And it does indicate that Epstein had tremendous contacts with world leaders, many of them incredibly sleazy, around the world, and saw himself as some sort of backroom peace broker or broker of some kind. So given the high level of his interactions, it would be absolutely criminally negligent of FBI counterintelligence and the CIA and the NSA not to have massive files on Jeffrey Epstein.
I'm not sure I would say massive, but I would certainly say at least from the CIA case, former CIA case officers that I spoke with, they were very confident that there would have likely been a interaction between the CIA's domestic branch, which not a lot of people realize still exists even post Church Committee, which is called the National Resources Division. This is the sort of domestic operations that interface both with Fortune 500 companies, corporate leaders, and also work to recruit foreign spies on U.S. soil. So, what these case officers said to me was, an operations officer said to me was basically that it would be negligent for someone who's as loudmouthed as Jeffrey Epstein, uh, who was talking about his connections on Wall Street to industry and to foreign leaders, for them not to have at least bumped him, debriefed him, spoken to him at some point. However, the notion that he was actively conducting espionage or counterintelligence, I actually think this most recent tranche of emails shows just how stupid he really was. You see his interactions with extraordinarily powerful people, former governmental officials, the Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary and president of Harvard. And it's just pathetic. I mean, it's just embarrassing. And so really what I think we see through this latest dump is that Jeffrey Epstein was an incredible con man. He had very little actual concrete tax advice. He had actually a rather poor rudimentary grasp of geopolitics and economics, but he surrounded himself with just an incredible number of people, many of whom were effectively bought and paid for with his vast fortune. They weren't really soliciting tax advice. They weren't really soliciting anything they couldn't get from reading the Wall Street Journal. But they were trying to solicit money. And in many instances, they did so successfully for their various projects and nonprofits.
But isn't it important to figure out where Epstein got his money from? And it looks as if he was running a blackmail and compromat factory.
Well, I'm not sure if we do have concrete evidence of that. I mean, we certainly know that he was whining and dining all of these people. We have these little bits and pieces of information, but what we don't have and what still hasn't been released are the full FBI case files, the full information from his vault. All these things have yet to be released, but I'm not sure that we're going to see him as the ultimate, puppet master with concrete compromise on these people. I think it was more of a feeling of him being addicted to cultivating these people. He was constantly not only recruiting these people for his own business interests and to trade them with other people, but because he himself liked this idea that being surrounded by scientists and barons of finance somehow legitimized his own intelligence, which again we see through these emails was actually shockingly low. So I don't know. I'm very curious to see what's in those FBI files. I think there's probably a good reason because as we saw with this latest tranche from House Oversight, there were a lot of other people implicated, right? We saw new figures coming out in this latest release, and I'm sure that's going to only broaden with the DOJ files. That those have been held even tighter. There's reporting that Donald Trump has been making the rounds, calling Republicans in the House to try to prevent them from voting on their release. So he's certainly worried. There were certainly implicating emails that were released in this tranche about him, and surely there will be more implication in the DOJ files. But I don't know. My money's not on a cut and dry honeypot operation. I think it's something much more subtle and amorphous than that.
But it's still puzzling to me, Daniel, why somebody that appears to be untalented, as you've made clear, was able to get people like Wexner and Leon Black to give him hundreds of millions of dollars. So I don't understand what the basis of his wealth was.
Well, my question to you, Ian, would be, have you ever met a Wall Street broker? Because they are not the sharpest tools in the shed. These money managers love to make out like they have some secret divination powers for discerning where the market's going to go. And the reality is most of them are people who went to Harvard, Yale, and got hired into Wall Street through their familial connections and keep the elite business going. And I think in
Right.
many regards he fits that mold. Now, what I will say is I think he was much more sociopathic and social than these people. He was at Bear Stearns. He quit because there was some sort of policy violation, if I recall correctly. Quit or was fired. There was some dispute, but I think he What I will say is he was uniquely talented at cultivating people and cultivating his own image. I mean, there's reporting from the late 80s, early 90s where Epstein is going around and telling people he was CIA. I mean, he wanted to cultivate this image. He wanted this idea that he was this international man of mystery. But again, I think people are sounding the alarm on these emails with these little shreds of information saying, look, here's how we know he was a spy. Here's one more illusion. But the reality is this was his bread and butter. This tapestry was how he was selling himself. It was how he was ingratiating himself with people. It was how he was convincing people like Victoria's Secret heir Les Wexner to give him the keys to the vault. So I just think we have to be careful of playing into the exact game that he set up for himself, if that makes sense.
Well, what concerns me though is when you talk about the files and how explosive they are likely to be. Cash Patel's already destroyed FBI counterintelligence. It's been purged to the bone. There's nothing left. CI3, which is in Crystal City, has been shut down altogether. And I'm not sure that these files necessarily exist because they could well have been purged. These people in power, like Bondi and Cash Patel, will do anything that Trump tells them, along with Ratcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, I mean, the reality is, at least for the FBI files, we do have records. There have been efforts to at least receive the catalog of those documents, right? We have, through the Freedom of Information Act, we know certain tranches exist. We know certain hard drives exist. We know certain case files exist. So there is a public roadmap, so to speak, for where these things are housed. I think there's an accountability mechanism there, at least, where we know at least the general contours, the general names of these files, if not their content. So we will see. I think I'm always very hesitant to ascribe more power to individuals or intelligence agencies than I think they truly have. I think we surrender a lot of our power as citizens in a democracy when we come to believe that these agencies are godlike or more powerful than us and our institutions. And history certainly provides instances where they began to flex their power, but I think we also have seen that our democracy hauled them into the light and excoriated them. Now, maybe it's time for another church committee. It probably is. I certainly think it is. But the notion that Kash Patel could unilaterally command the FBI to destroy these records and that special agents whose own necks would be on the chopping block would follow through with that order without preserving them or at least whistleblowing to one of the relevant congressional committees is not something I think it has happened in full. And I think there's a good chance that whether it's through whistleblowers or whether it's through congressional subpoena, we are going to see what the DOJ is holding in its vault.
So you think we'll hear from Maureen Comey at some point?
I think we'll hear from someone. I mean, I think that there is a lot of damning evidence in that vault, in those files. I'm not sure it's the type of damning evidence that the majority of conspiracy theorists think it is. But again, I think if we extrapolate from the current tranche that was released by House Oversight, the 20,000 largely emails released from Epstein's estate, I mean, you see the way that people who weren't even receiving that big of donations or favors. I mean, there were people who were connected to Larry Summers who were vacationing on St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands and they got stuck. And what do? They hit up Epstein because they hear he's got all these connections. And what does he do? He lends them his car. He gets them on another private jet out. So I think we're gonna see a lot of people who were not necessarily implicated like some figures where it really seems like they were probably engaging in illegal sex acts with children. But we're gonna see more people who brushed aside Epstein's horrific convictions for sex crimes against children and were willing to do business with him or even ask him for favors. And I think that's going to be the biggest crater, so to speak. I think that most people are going to be involved in taking meetings with him, attending dinners with him, corresponding casually with him. And that in and of itself to me is implicating. That shows how willing people are to brush aside horrific crimes against children in order to network with someone rich and powerful who claims to be able to make anything happen.
Of course, Trump has never, ever seemed to be outraged by that, what you're just talking about, this horrible pedophile and the depraved British socialite who was the sex trafficker. He was more annoyed that they poached a young woman from Mar-a-Lago. But what I find interesting in these texts from the estate was, and particularly the conversations or the exchanges with former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers in 2017, Epstein wrote to Summers, I have met some very bad people, none as bad as Trump. There's not one decent cell in Trump's body. So, yes, he's dangerous. So, little wonder Trump is furious about these releases and wants to change the subject by trying to tie Bill Clinton to Epstein. The other one that got my attention was in July 16th of 2018, after Trump's disastrous Helsinki meeting with Putin, in which he believed Putin over his own intel people. Larry Summers says to Epstein, do the Russians have something on Trump? And Epstein says, my email is full of similar comments. I'm sure his view is that it all went super well and that he's charming his adversaries, but he has no idea of symbolism. He has no idea of most things. So this is somebody that's was his best friend for 10 years or 15 years, really trashing him.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I
And
think I
I
was
think
going
it extends beyond just the Russia stuff. I mean, there were emails in this latest tranche that showed that Epstein knew about Trump's sketchy financing of his, of his casinos in Atlantic City, of Mar-a-Lago. I mean, there was even just nitty-gritty, backwards, dirty financing deals that Epstein was discussing in this latest tranche.
So this really is, this is Trump's been one step ahead of the sheriff all of his political life and his business life, and very few people have been able to lay a glove on him. And he himself said, "I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose a vote." So is Epstein going to be the one that pulls back the curtain here and lets us know what a fraud Trump is?
I mean, it is fascinating to look at politically. I mean, the fact that this issue that this issue has sort of sliced through everything else in our that normally defines our political system. It seems to have sliced through the pocketbook issues that are sort of the grounding of uh, you know politicking in 2025. I mean, you have Republican members of the House of Representatives who are defecting, who Donald Trump is calling and can't peel away from voting to release this. I mean, people are livid, and in a sense, it is a incredible reflection of the populist rage that drove Donald Trump into the White House the first and second times. People who wanted someone who's going to come and smash up the system, and in a sense, this has somehow emerged as the ultimate signifier of that system. Despite Donald Trump's relationship with this guy, despite Donald Trump's luxurious image and celebrity, people are out for blood on this issue, and they have proved that they're not going to let Trump or Cash Patel off the hook until they see some kind of release out of the FBI that is real and provides more information about the FBI's role in this investigation.
So, Daniel, is that to say then that all of this crazy QAnon stuff sort of backfired? Remember the guy showed up at the pizza place in Georgetown and shot it up because
Right.
he thought Hillary Clinton's people were in the basement drinking the children's blood. But now that weird mindset is now suddenly not so much focusing on Hillary Clinton, but on Jeffrey Epstein and his relationship with Trump.
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the question is, this seems to be a lot more real. I mean, it depends on what part of the so-called conspiracy you want to talk about, but certainly we now know that this guy, Jeffrey Epstein, was connected to some of the richest and most powerful people in America. Now, in my sense, that is different than, Pizzagate or QAnon, conspiracy theories that sort of vanish into thin air when they're probed a little bit. We now have evidence that he was taking meetings right up until the time of his death with all of these people, including the former president of Harvard University, Larry Summers, who, by the way, in my article that I published this week, was heavily involved in planning for the Democrats' 2029 agenda. So, in a sense, people aren't being conspiracy theorists, at least along that one line of the fact that he was connected to all the rich and powerful rulers, so to speak, of this country. So I don't know. Yes, I think part of the QAnon, part of the Pizzagate thing, there is a sort of populist conspiratorial energy to it. But in this case, I'm not sure it's fair to call it a conspiracy. It looks a lot more like truth.
And one of the other things that Larry Summers said in his exchanges with Epstein was that Epstein said to him that Trump is borderline insane. And boy, is that loaded.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if Jeffrey Epstein is the best person to be weighing in on insanity. I mean, this is a guy who was sexually assaulting children and buying private islands, creating lurid murals in all of his properties. But it certainly says a lot that so many of these people were willing to completely look the other way, even in 2018, 2019. I mean, and let's not forget about the Democrats who were implicated. In this most recent tranche, we got a series of extraordinarily embarrassing and bizarre emails from Barack Obama's former White House counsel and a current Goldman Sachs executive who seemed to have an extraordinarily chummy relationship with Epstein right up until the day he died. So, it's incredible to see that this was actually a bipartisan series of relationships with Epstein and was not confined to one political camp.
Well, but just in closing, it does seem that he was a very long time friend of Trump's, at least 10, 15 years. And when Trump was really down and out, he even fed him. So they were pretty tight for the longest time. And when you,
Absolutely, absolutely. But it
and
is interesting to see that there was sort of this lull. I mean, there was this sort of falling out, it seems, but there was also this eagerness by Epstein to get back in with Trump, and sort of, if you read through the thousands of emails, you get the sense that he really believed that maybe he was going to be able to circle around and get back into his good graces.
Right, but at the same time, he's trying to sell his expertise to Vitaly Shurkin, the Russian ambassador to the U.S. and UN, by giving him the goods on Trump, which presumably included him being borderline insane. And then he tried to reach out to Lavrov, via a European diplomat, to do a briefing. So he may have also, at the same time, wanting to be back in Trump's graces, he was also trashing him behind his back.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great anecdote to close on because it shows that, again, at his core, he was not a foreign agent for the United States, for Israel, for Russia, for China. He was a con man out for himself, and he was willing to sell anyone down the river and create arrangements with anyone else to make a buck.
Well, Daniel Boguslaw, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me in. Appreciate it.
And again, I be speak with Daniel Boguslaw, who's an investigative reporter based in Washington, D.C. His interests include corporate corruption, congressional and White House investigations, American influence overseas, and organized labor. And his work's featured in the Intercept, the New Republic, and the American Prospect, among others. And he has an article at the American Prospect, Epstein's confidant Larry Summers Guiding Caps Project 2029, and an article at Unheard, the CIA's Epstein Problem. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into how Trump first targeted Antifa, then issued Presidential Security Memorandum 7 to target a broad swath of his enemies, and now on Friday targeting 4 German, Greek, and Italian anarchist organizations as foreign terrorist organizations. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Faiza Patel, who's a Senior Director of the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program. She is a nationally recognized expert on government surveillance, especially its targeting of minority communities, domestic terrorism, and the impact of technology on civil rights and civil liberties. And she has an article at the Brennan Center, Trump's Orders Targeting Anti-Fascism Aim to Criminalize Opposition. Welcome to Background Briefing, Faiza Patel.
Thank you.
So obviously there was some alarm expressed recently with Trump's signing of National Security Presidential Memorandum number 7. Not too many people in the press picked up on it. Ken Klipperstein did, and I talked to him about it. And it was a kind of an Orwellian kind of memorandum, almost to the level of that Tom Cruise movie about pre-crime, where it was suggesting that you could be even if you thought about things that were against Christianity, against family values, against the MAGA definition of what's right and wrong, that you could be a criminal. But now they've gone further by going after foreign terrorist organizations, particularly designating four German, Greek, and Italian anarchist groups as foreign terrorist organizations. They also, in this latest attack on Antifa, which is essentially a mythical organization to begin with, they've mentioned, of course, National Security Presidential Memorandum number 7 in the announcement of going after these so-called foreign FTOs. So, what's the relationship then between these steps on the road towards anti-fascism?
So I think, there's a number of interlinked actions happening now. The first thing they did actually in September was to designate Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, which is not a category that is recognized in the law. The next thing that happened was the what we call NSPM 7, which, as you know, is a sort of sprawling document that does a few things. One thing it does is that it directs the Attorney General to make recommendations for designating groups as domestic terrorist organizations. Now, that does not have any legal significance because there is no statute that says anything about domestic terrorist organizations. There's a number of laws that relate to terrorism, which can be domestic and international, but there's nothing about domestic terrorist organizations. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. But what the memorandum did was that it basically directed federal law enforcement agencies to go after a swath of people. And when I say swath, I mean the enormity of the groups and activities targeted is something to really kind of grapple with. So you mentioned earlier that the NSPM 7 targets a range of ideologies. So it's everything from anti-Christianity to anti-Americanism to, opposition to traditional family values, to, opposition to law enforcement and a secure border. So it's really just a range of things that the administration considers to be oppositional to it. But in addition to that, what it did was it also brought a range of activities within the instruction given to federal law enforcement agencies. And what I mean by that is that the memo conflates protest activity, which is protected under the First Amendment, as well as criminal activity like the murder of Charlie Kirk. And it combines all of those into a single conspiracy, suggesting that law enforcement should be going after not just the criminal acts, but the sort of expressive acts, the associational acts, which are not criminal and in fact protected by the Constitution. So it's quite a broad, sweeping memo.
So, but Antifa or anti-fascism in general, as you point out, that was the first to target Antifa, and then you got NSPM 7, and now you've got the FTO. So that you can see the steps here.
Right.
But it's a contradiction in terms, isn't it? Because Antifa is not an organization, and anarchists, by definition, aren't organized, right? I mean, aren't they against organization? I mean, I
Well,
just, where are, can you pinpoint Antifa? Can you tell me where I can go find an Antifa person?
no, I can't do that. But I think it's important to think about what they're accomplishing by using these broad terms like anti-fascism, anti-Christianity. Because I think as a lawyer, my first instinct is like, what are they saying? This isn't a thing, right? How are they going to freeze Antifa's bank accounts when there is no Antifa? But I actually think the very breadth of the ideological enemies identified in NSPM 7 is a feature, not a bug, which is it gives the administration maximum flexibility to go after, a range of ideologies, or rather after people who embrace a range of ideologies. So it's not they're not restricting themselves in any way. They're actually leaving the field wide open to themselves, which gives them a lot of room as they think about who they want to prosecute and investigate moving forward.
Well, they've got a lot on their plate, haven't they? Because I would suggest that the number of anti-fascists in this country, in other words, people who oppose an authoritarian takeover and the destruction of American democracy and the installation of Donald Trump as a dictator, I would think that it's about two-thirds of the country. I think about one-third with the MAGA people and the Republicans who seem to absolutely roll over for Trump and are either complicit or cowards. So let's just take that figure. Are two-thirds of Americans anti-fascists?
Well, I mean, I don't know if two-thirds of Americans are actively demonstrating their belief in anti-fascism. They may believe that, but I think that's not really the point, right? The point here is really it's an attack on civil society groups, right? The idea here is we want to go after people, we want to go after nodes of opposition, right? So whether it's universities or law firms or civil society groups, this is sort of step three in that kind of arc of targeting potential sources of opposition. And so what this memo and the Antifa memo together do is they say, well, if you are in any way supporting, these anti-fascist ideologies, we're going to investigate you. Now, if you are, um, a nonprofit organization that, say, organizes anti-ICE protests, right? And anti-ICE is one of the things that they're very focused on uh, protests against ICE, which they basically equate with violence, right? So you are now in the crosshairs of being targeted by the administration, being investigated for being a potential domestic terrorist, potentially having your nonprofit tax exempt status revoked, potentially having financial sanctions on you, such as debanking and sort of scrutiny of your your finances. So all of these things create a lot of pressure on civil society, right? It makes people very nervous when they think that the government is targeting them for their First Amendment protected activity and costing it as domestic terrorism.
But so much of the press today, big newspapers like The Guardian operate on a foundation trust, and they are 501c3s, as am I, and as are many of my colleagues in what could be loosely called the alternative press or the non-corporate press or whatever you want to call it. So that puts me in the crosshairs, doesn't it? If they want to shut down anybody that's critical of ICE, and I certainly am, can they make a call to the IRS and revoke background briefings or public truth media's 501c3?
Well, I don't think it's quite as simple as that, right? But as is often the case with these kinds of tactics, right? There's the actual effect, right? Like the small number of people and groups who actually get prosecuted or investigated. And then there's the broader chilling effect. And we've seen this play out again and again, right? We've seen it, with the universities, we've seen it with the law firms, and, you may well see it also with civil society. It also depends on, you know, what your resources are like. If you're a big organization, you've probably been preparing for this for some time now because it's been signaled for a while. And so you have your defenses lined up and you are likely to go to court if the administration takes action against you. If you're a smaller group, which is less well resourced, you might find yourself saying, well, is it really worth it for me to do, this particular action or this particular story, given that there is this potential that the government is going to come after me?
But am I paranoid or am I right in suggesting that if the government has decided that an organization that doesn't exist, Antifa, that they can go after them and spend enormous focus and resources in going after this amorphous group, then they can go after anyone.
I mean, I think that's
Isn't
kind of the point.
that is the point. I see.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they've succeeded, I guess, but are they going to start implementing? They put the threat out there. Are they going to back it up with action?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, they recently, I think, sometime in the middle of October, the FBI trumpeted its first Antifa indictment against two individuals who are alleged to have shot at and exploded fireworks at a facility in Texas where people were being held for deportation. And that indictment is it's an interesting story because all of the people who were involved or allegedly involved in that attack were actually already indicted back in the summer, shortly after the attack took place, for sort of normal crimes, right? And now they have issued a new indictment against two of the individuals involved in those activities, alleging that they are part of a broader Antifa cell and bringing specific terrorism charges against them. Now, whether or not those charges stick is obviously an open question, but that is, I think, the sort of the first salvo in their building up of this Antifa threat.
So, is there any justification, given that they've made such a deal out of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and that people like the Minister of Hate, Stephen Miller, he and others are taking up residence on army bases because they feel threatened? I mean, it doesn't seem real. I haven't heard anybody really targeting these people, but that seems to be their mindset. So, that is this what's driving it? The people who are out, particularly somebody like Stephen Miller, who's really behind ICE and their brutality. It's his paranoia that's reflected in all of these presidential executive orders and memorandum.
Well, it's hard for me to say whether it's his individual paranoia, but he's certainly made statements about, that this is, part of the administration's effort to dismantle a violent left-wing conspiracy, right? And I think what you see oftentimes and particularly in the context of ICE, we've seen it a few times, is that there's this conflation between words and actions, right? So when Dan Bovino, who's running ICE operations out in California, I believe, or no, maybe in Chicago. Yeah, in Chicago and Illinois, in a recent deposition, it was reported that in his view, the protesters at ICE facilities are all rioters per se, right? So that gives you sort of a sense of the mindset where any criticism of ICE operations is automatically elevated and treated as being an extreme threat as opposed to being kept in perspective so that if you have protesters, right, there may be some violence at a protest, but, there is a protest piece to it as well. So, I mean, they don't seem to distinguish between the speech and the action, where, if somebody commits violence, that's a criminal act that can be prosecuted. If someone is simply saying, whatever, no matter how heated the language is criticizing ICE, whether it's online or whether it's at a facility, that is protected speech. But they don't make that distinction, I think.
Right. And they're the ones that shoot a Presbyterian minister in the head with pepper balls. So I thank you for joining us, Faiza Patel. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And again, I'll be speaking with Faiza Patel, who's the Senior Director of the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program. She is a nationally recognized expert on government surveillance, especially its targeting of minority communities, domestic terrorism, and the impact of technology on civil rights and civil liberties. And she has an article at the Brennan Center, Trump's Orders Targeting Anti-Fascism Aim to Criminalize Opposition. We're going to take a brief station break, and Sasha Linden Cohen will be looking into how much AI will be an issue in the next election, talking to a guest from the New Republic about his article, Americans Hate AI, Will the Democrats Join Them?
Yes, some is good and some is bad. Brother, keep your faith on hand on every side. On each street corner you will find there are people in this place on every side.
Welcome back. I'm Sasha Linden Cohen, and you're listening to Background Briefing with Ian Masters. I'm filling in for Ian this segment to talk about a subject that I've been pretty fascinated with for a long time, which is AI. There is a lot to talk about when it comes to AI. So there's its environmental impacts, its effects on our culture. Today, we're going to focus a little more specifically on how Americans feel about AI and its impacts, and how some politicians are trying to meet the moment. We are joined by Aaron Regunberg, who is a contributing editor at The New Republic, where his latest article is Americans Hate AI. Will the Democrats join them? Aaron is also the director of the Climate Accountability Project at Public Citizen, and he previously served as a member of the Rhode Island House of Representatives. Thank you so much for joining us, Aaron.
It's great to be here, Sasha.
I feel like AI has been in the news a lot for a whole host of reasons, most of which are pretty concerning. There's the data centers and the water and energy usage, but there's also the pretty frightening social implications, right? So the outsourcing of critical thinking, people forming relationships with chatbots. Your piece really focuses on the political implications. So how the Democrats can kind of seize the moment, or how they should be doing that, as you argue. They swept up in a lot of places on election day a couple weeks ago, and I'm hoping you can lay out sort of why you think a lot of those wins can be attributed to candidates taking strong anti-AI stances.
Yeah, so I really think that this has all the makings of being the next political realignment. For the party that is willing to jump into the breach on this. I think we saw with last week's elections the incredible potential of AI's impact on affordability as a political issue. Basically, every major Democratic win involved Democratic candidates talking about rising electricity costs and rates, and the connection between those and these massive data centers that are coming into communities and using so much power, that rates are going up, and it is regular working people who are being asked to pay for those infrastructure needs that are benefiting a few AI billionaires. And so there's so much focus on affordability right now, and that's good. And Democrats are refining our message, and we're seeing how powerful it can be. And the AI infrastructure build out is just a huge piece of that story. So we're already seeing the potential just there. But as you mentioned, the issue is bigger, and it touches on basically every aspect of our lives, right? It's affordability and energy costs, but it is also job displacement. It is also protecting our kids. It is also how we think about the world. It is also enshifying every aspect of our internet and digital landscape and lives. It is also creating this potential bubble that is going to take all of us down while these AI billionaires are maneuvering for bailouts. So it just feels to me like this is so obviously the next big issue. And if Democrats have the wherewithal, which obviously we can never take for granted based on recent history, but if Democrats are able to say we're not going to listen to the special interests and the big tech super PACs and lobbyists, but instead we're actually going to go in on this issue that so many working people, left, right, and center, blue areas, red areas, can all agree on, this could be how we win back power.
I'm wondering, I guess, as you mentioned, this is like an opportunity for the Democrats. It hasn't been like incorporated into the platform in a super widespread way. But how partisan of an issue this is this? Like, there's a lot of people of a lot of different political affiliations that are being affected by these data centers. Are there Republicans running on anti-AI stances as well?
Well, I think I think among regular voters right now, it is an almost completely unpolarized issue, and those are so rare in American politics right now. This is an issue that I think a party can talk about in liberal areas and can talk about in swing areas and can talk about in conservative areas. A lot of the opposition that we've been seeing to these massive data centers have been happening in rural and Republican leaning areas because those people don't want these in their backyards. We're seeing concerns about the sort of cultural and social role of AI coming from high profile voices on the right. Matt Walsh, the far right commentator, has recently been talking a lot about this, and what a massive negative impact AI is looking to have. As far as how parties are actually treating it, the Trump administration has gone all in on rolling out the red carpet for these AI billionaires. They're working to make permitting easier so that these data centers can be put in so many people's backyards to jack up their electricity rates. They're even, taking steps to try to block local and state governments from pursuing appropriate regulation of this technology. So again, from the perspective of someone who wants to stop the rise of the Republicans Party's authoritarian fascism and feels like it is incredibly important for Democrats to win back power, this is such an obvious issue for us to take a strong stance on and prove to those people across the political spectrum, whether they're concerned about jobs, whether they're concerned about the social impacts, whether they're concerned about their utility bills and these horrific structures that are coming into their backyards and using up all their water. This is an opportunity for a party that has been seen as out of touch and that has no longer been seen as connected to the working class to make very clear whose side we're on. We're on your side. We're on the side of regular people who don't want to be guinea pigs in some AI billionaires' misanthropic quest to subvert humanity. It's a slam dunk, other than the fact that we know that the Democratic Party far too often can't get out of its own way and is too co-opted by the same moneyed interests that we're fighting against right now.
Definitely. I mean, it's interesting because these sort of two elements that we're talking about, the sort of infrastructural implications, the energy, the data centers, and that's effects on people's day-to-day sort of physical realities is one thing. And then there's the sort of more insidious consequences. I saw on Twitter or X the other day a woman or an advertisement for an app that showed a woman FaceTiming an AI version of her mom who'd passed away. There's things that feel like sci-fi movies. And I'm wondering, I guess, in terms of how people are voting and how legislators are thinking about this and politicians are thinking about this, have you found these concerns going hand in hand with that messaging, the social concerns kind of being combined with the data concerns? Or do you feel like the pitch is really the more nitty-gritty regulatory issues? Because there is an appetite for the products, but obviously the consequences of those products are really negatively impacting people's lives. I guess I'm wondering what the sort of intersection is between the social concerns and the physical concerns.
Yeah, I think that what we saw in the recent elections, the focus was overwhelmingly on the infrastructure, on the impact on prices that working people are feeling and struggling with. And that is huge, right? That is why Democrats lost the 2024 election, other than Joe Biden's extremely poor judgment in initially running again. But we lost on affordability. And so our ability to turn that around is huge. And I think we now have concrete proof that is a compelling platform and strategy. I don't think we have seen the other issues be sort of placed in a clear campaign framework yet. The impact on our kids, impact on our ability to think, impact on jobs, impact on our understanding of what's real, whether it comes to elections with these deep fakes or other areas. We're just at the very, very beginning of these trends, right? All of this is going to be getting worse. The job law stuff, we're just at the tiny beginning of what's going to be a massive force and dynamic in American economy and our politics moving forward. The potential effect of a bubble bursting, which is looking like a bigger and bigger likelihood moving forward. The kinds of stories that we're just starting to hear about, teenagers getting egged on to commit suicide. We're just going to be hearing more and more about this. And so if Democrats really want to be in a position to be seen as the guardians of humanity against these forces, it's one thing to sort of come on late once all of these things, once all the dominoes have fallen. It's a lot more credible to be able to say we've been here from the beginning, standing up against these forces that we knew were clearly coming at us. And so we should be working now to make very clear which side we're on.
To get ahead of it, yeah. Can you explain a little bit about the bubble bursting that you're predicting and think will happen pretty imminently?
Yeah, so more and more economic analysts have been commenting on a worrying set of dynamics. The amount of economic activity that is being taken up right now by the AI sector, the concerning circular financing arrangements that these companies like OpenAI and NVIDIA and others are using to essentially get around the reality that there is far more money and hype right now than there is an actual business model. OpenAI is losing many dollars for every dollar that they are earning in revenue right now. Their massive valuation, 500 billion, they're looking for $1 trillion valuation. That's all based on speculation. And there's worrying signs. One thing that I saw that really perked my ears up, Michael Burry, the investor that was made famous in The Big Short for betting against the US housing market before the 2008 collapse, he recently made some waves when it was reported that he's put about 80% of his portfolio into shorting these big AI companies. Wow. So all the signs are there. And again, when the bubble bursts, we see again and again, it is not the people who created the bubble that are harmed. It's regular people. And in fact, the sort of the initial inspiration for the piece I wrote for the New Republic was an interview that Sam Altman gave last week, where he basically said, the federal government should be the insurer of last resort for such an important sector as ours. And there are other indications that these folks are starting to maneuver and work for a bailout if and when this crash does come.
Yeah, counting on that safety net.
Exactly. A safety net that regular people do not have. And again, we know, I obviously desperately hope none of this happens, but if it does, we know from 2008, the resentment that you get when you have elites who cause a crisis like this and then are never held to account. I think there's a lot of smart people who think that had the Obama administration prosecuted some of the Wall Street actors responsible for the 2008 crash, we probably never would have had a Donald Trump, because that kind of populist anger at an unaccountable system that's rigged against me that Trump was so effective at riding, it maybe would have not had the same amount of energy behind it. And if folks are maneuvering for that to happen again, I know which side I want my party to be on.
Yeah, definitely. How would you say these issues surrounding AI are causing disputes within parties, like specifically within the Republican Party? You mentioned that some right-wing talking heads are super opposed. Trump has imposed his own regulations, kind of like content moderation. There's tension there between various politicians. I guess, can you tell me a little bit about those rifts?
Sure. Well, I think that there are Republicans on the ground, local and state elected officials who undoubtedly are looking at the results of these recent elections and seeing, oh, there's a real issue here that we need to get on the right side of. So I think there will be some of that conversation. I think you do have voices, prominent voices on the right that are starting to voice opposition. I mentioned Matt Walsh, who's a pretty important figure in that world. He recently posted, "We're sleepwalking into a dystopia that any rational person can see from miles away. Are we really going to lie down and let AI take everything from us? Is that the plan?" And so I think this is, so many issues in American politics have been slotted into this partisan field, this sort of left-right spectrum where people are like, okay, well, I know I maybe don't have an opinion on this issue, but I know where I am politically and which party I'm a part of, and I know what the party's position is on this, and so I know where I stand. And this AI stuff is too new. That hasn't happened yet. So it's just this enormous wedge where you can get a coalition that has the potential to win in states that Democrats have really been struggling in, particularly because, despite the fact that there are these Republican voices that are recognizing the harm, the embodiment of the current Republican Party, Donald Trump and his administration, is doing precisely none of that.
Definitely.
Is literally all in on the worst excesses, the worst, most corrupt, plutocratic way to sort of approach these issues that are just listening to the billionaires that he had in the front row of his inauguration. And so it is a perfect layup for Democrats who are thinking about, how do we break out of the typecast that we've been put in? How do we build majoritarian coalitions in states where we have not been competitive? This is the way to do it. You can run against the Republican policy on an issue that people are massively starting to feel concerns about. It's a win-win. It just requires Democrats to actually step up and embrace that populist position and say, screw you to the lobbyists and donors that they too often listen to. And so I don't know for sure if the Democratic Party is going to do the right thing on this, but it's very clear what they should be doing. And I think we need to be beating a drumbeat to make sure that it happens.
To seize that window of opportunity. Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Aaron. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And again, we've been speaking with Aaron Regunberg, a contributing editor at The New Republic, a climate lawyer and a progressive organizer. He is the director of the Climate Accountability Project at Public Citizen and previously served as a member of the Rhode Island House of Representatives. His latest article at The New Republic is "Americans Hate AI. Will the Democrats Join them?"
And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.